The S-3 Viking was designed for anti-submarine warfare, shortly ASW missions. However, it never fought against the submerged silent menace during its career. Still, this aircraft proved its value in other duties such as surface and ground attack, tanker, ELANT, and launching decoy. Today we're investigating the S-3, the last carrier-based ASW aircraft. The S-3 was the last representative of a combat aircraft type that military planners gave it up for a long time. Today, no country operates a carrier-based ASW aircraft. The Viking was the child of specific conditions of the First Cold War. As soon as this era ended, its primary mission definition became irrelevant. Yet, the S-3 survived until 2021 by transforming to perform other missions. The origin story of the Viking goes back to the early 1950s. In 1953, the US Navy began to convert the Essex-class ships to ASW carriers. In the early 1950s, helicopters were still in their infancy, which made fixed-wing aircraft the best airborne submarine hunters. Like the French Alizé and British Gannet, the US S-2 Tracker would protect the Atlantic convoys from underwater threats in a possible Third World War. However, by the mid-1960s, the US Navy realized that advanced new-generation Soviet submarines would soon be on the game, making the piston-engined S-2s with primitive ASW equipment obsolete. Thus, in 1964, the idea of creating a new aircraft arose to be used on the Essex-class ASW carriers. After initial studies, tactical and technical requirements were formulated in 1966. 2 years later, the US Navy initiated an open competition in the scope of the VSX program. In this tender, Lockheed teamed up with two other companies. LTV, which had significant experience with carrier-based aircraft, was responsible for designing and producing wings, engine pods, tail unit, and landing gear. UNIVAC worked on a revolutionary digital computer with high-speed data processing, which would be essential for the new ASW concept. Lockheed was responsible for the fuselage, avionics, integration, and final assembly. This team preferred some existing subsystems to reduce development time and costs. The main landing gear was taken from the F-8 Crusader and the nose gear from the A-7 Corsair II. Later, the selected General Electric TF-34 engine would also be used in the A-10 Thunderbolt II. Lockheed Team's aircraft competed with Convair's Model 21 and Grumman's G304 and won the tender on August 4, 1969. On January 21, 1972, the first prototype met the skies for the first time before the Navy's maiden flight deadline of March 15. On May 3, 1972, the USA gave the initial order. On November 29, 1973, the 9th YS-3A prototype made its first landing on the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal. The S-3A became operational on February 20, 1974. Lockheed produced 186 Vikings between 1974 and 1978. The US Navy initially intended to deploy the aircraft on the Essex-class ships. However, it changed its force structure during the S-3's development phase and decommissioned the ASW carriers. So, the Vikings served on the supercarriers. It was a perfect timing. The US carrier task strike groups had gained a superior ASW capability before the Soviet Navy introduced the advanced Project 670M Scud and Project 949 Granite-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarines. The first, whose NATO designation was Charlie II, could launch 8 P-120 Malahits with a 160 km range. The second, whose NATO designation was Oscar I, could carry 24 P-700 Granites with a 625 km range. With their supersonic speeds and nuclear warheads, these missiles launched from the new Soviet submarines were game changers. Neither existing shipborne helicopters nor conventional destroyers were proper solutions against Charlie II's and Oscar I's, but the S-3 was. Compared to the Tracker, the Viking could search an area 3 times as large and carry twice as many weapons and buoys. The fuselage, wings, and tail unit were made of aluminum alloys with limited use of composite materials. Its Fowler-type flaps increased the lift, allowing it to land at slower speeds. The S-3's landing speed was as low as 185 km per hour compared to A-6 Intruder's 204 and the F-14 Tomcat's 248 km per hour. The designers preferred a large tail to ensure the aircraft's stability in harsh weather conditions, but it was too high to fit into the carrier hangar with low ceilings. So the tail was designed to fold sideways using a hydraulic device. The Viking's TF-34 high-bypass turbofans had excellent fuel efficiency. Due to the engine's characteristic sound, the aircraft was nicknamed the War Hoover after the vacuum cleaner brand. The nozzles were directed upward at an angle of 10 degrees to maintain the balance of the S-3 during sudden changes in thrust. The transition from the low throttle mode to the maximum mode was carried out in 3.5 seconds. Computerized fault-finding equipment, built-in test equipment, and versatile avionics shop test compatibility simplified shipboard maintenance. The S-3 has an auxiliary power unit which gave the aircraft unassisted start capability. The initial model could provide only minimal electric power and pressurized air for aircraft cooling and the engine's pneumatic starters. Later, it was replaced with a new and more powerful one that could provide complete electrical service. The air-conditioned cockpit was pressurized, so the crew, consisting of the pilot, co-pilot, tactical coordinator, and sensor operator, could operate the S-3 without oxygen masks at high altitudes. The tactical coordinator formulated the strategy and instructed the pilot and co-pilot on the necessary maneuvers for a successful ASW mission. Besides the flying duties, the co-pilot was responsible for the non-acoustic sensors like the radar and infrared camera and navigation. The sensor operator controlled the acoustic sensors. While existing land and ship-based ASW aircraft had separate instrumentation and controls for each sensor system, the Viking had one of the best mission computers of its time, integrating all sensor systems on the aircraft. The separate multi-purpose display on each crew station could display data from each. This feature, introducing an unprecedented level of system integration, allowed the crew to consult with each other by examining the same data at multiple stations simultaneously. The computer had two central processors, storage devices, an input-output unit, and a coupling unit, which backed up each other in case of failure. Yet, such technology was still primitive in the 1970s. So the high stress of catapult-assisted takeoff occasionally caused a system failure. The crew had to restart the computer and reload the software in such situations. The Viking's advanced mission computer was also integrated into the P-3-based Canadian CP-140 Aurora maritime patrol aircraft. The S-3A's AN/APS-116 radar had a maximum range of 280 kilometers. It could detect a submarine periscope at a 55-kilometer distance up to sea state 3. The aircraft also has the OR-89 forward-looking infrared camera and the AN/ASQ-81 magnetic anomaly detector. The Viking carried 60 sonobuoys, 59 for ASW rolls, and 1 for emergency radio beacon. All could be deployed within 10 seconds. The aircraft had two underwing hardpoints for fuel tanks, general purpose, and cluster bombs, missiles, rockets, and storage pods. Its 4 internal bomb base stations could carry general purpose bombs, aerial torpedoes, and nuclear depth charges. The S-3 could be fitted with the ALE-39 countermeasure system to protect the carrier from missile attack. It could launch up to 90 chaff rounds, flares, and expendable jammers. Even though Germany and Japan intended to acquire the aircraft, these plans were never realized, and these countries preferred the Atlantique and P-3 respectively. The USA was the sole operator of the S-3. In 2013, South Korea considered this aircraft for replacing its aging S-2s, but abandoned the plan in 2017. The S-3A had a 4-person crew. The aircraft had a length of 16.26 meters, a wingspan of 20.93 meters, and a height of 6.93 meters. Its wing area was 55.6 square meters. The Viking's empty and maximum takeoff weights were about 12,060 and 23,830 kilograms respectively. Two 41.26 kN General Electric TF34 GE2 turbofan engines provided a top speed of 795 km per hour. The cruise speed of the aircraft was 650 km per hour. Its range was over 5,120 km. The S-3A could climb to an altitude of 12,500 meters, in other words, 40,900 feet. It had a 2,200 kg weapon carrying capacity. The US Navy began to upgrade 119 of its SA-3As to B standards in 1987. The aircraft were fitted with new sensors and avionics, such as the AN/APS-137 Inverse Synthetic Aperture Radar and the Joint Tactical Information Distribution System. Besides, unlike its predecessor, the S-3B had the AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missile launching capability. It could also be fitted with external fuel tanks, allowing the Viking to refuel other aircraft. After the USSR collapsed, the Soviet submarine threat also became a history. So, the US Navy removed S-3B's many ASW equipment and redefined their mission definition as maritime patrol, surface and ground attack, over-the-horizon targeting, and aircraft refueling. Later, the aircraft was upgraded a couple more times. New ring laser gyroscopes with an enhanced GPS inertial navigation system replaced its older hardware. The Viking was equipped with digital electronic flight instruments. The aircraft gained the laser-guided AGM-65E, infrared-guided AGM-65F, and the AGM-84HK SLAM-ER air-to-surface missile launching capability. 16 S-3As were converted to Eland aircraft to replace the EA-3B Sky Warrior and renamed as ES-3A Shadow. 6 aircraft designated as US-3A were converted for a specialized utility and limited cargo carrier onboard delivery requirement. Another 6, designated as Aladdin Viking, were converted for overland surveillance and Eland missions. The mission definition and equipment of the Beartrap Viking variant are still classified. The Grey Wolf Viking, Orca Viking, and Outlaw Viking were testbed for S-3 versions for different radar, avionics, and concepts. The Calypso Viking, C-3, and KS-3A were non-serial anti-smuggling, cargo, and tanker variants, respectively. One aircraft was extensively rebuilt into a NASA research aircraft. Thankfully, an apocalyptic Third World War never happened, and the S-3 never hunted a Soviet submarine in combat. Still, the Viking was baptized with fire during the 1991 Gulf War. On February 20, 1991, an S-3 of the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt sank an Iraqi gunboat with Mark 82 bombs near Bubiyan Island. 1 week later, another Viking sank a Zhuk-class patrol vessel. These aircraft also identified and targeted numerous Iraqi naval assets. Besides, they fought on land. The S-3s destroyed an Iraqi Silkworm anti-ship missile site, anti-aircraft gun emplacements, and coastal radars. 12 years later, during Operation Iraqi Freedom, a Viking from the aircraft carrier USS Constellation neutralized a significant Iraqi naval and leadership target in the port city of Basra with a laser-guided Maverick missile. The aircraft also performed critical Eland and aerial refueling missions over Yugoslavia, the Middle East, and Afghanistan. The S-3 was removed from the frontline fleet service aboard aircraft carriers in 2009. Yet the aircraft continued serving in range clearance and surveillance operations until 2016, when it retired. The S-3 of NASA kept flying until 2021. The Viking was created to replace the Tracker. Ironically, the Argentine naval aviation still operates the turboprop-engined S-2s, while we can see the S-3 only on the ground. The Viking was the last carrier-based ASW aircraft. With its retirement, this type of combat aircraft became history. It was the protector of the US aircraft carrier groups and vital sea lines against the Soviet submarines during the last phase of the First Cold War. The S-3 Viking is one of the unforgettable legends of military aviation history. Thanks for watching our video. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell button to be notified of our new videos. Also, you can now click the join button to support our channel. And as always, we would greatly appreciate all of your likes, comments, and shares.